Hello. CAT 2024 Slot 1 VARC can definitely be comparable to difficulty level of CAT 23 as well as CAT 22. Of course, CAT 22 and CAT 23 had their own challenges. They had very difficult to read, dense text, question stems that were quite complex and application-based. The difficulty level of CAT 24 VARC came largely from the closeness of the options, the highly inferential questions and the closeness of the options. The RCs seemed like they were very long. However, most of them are roughly around 500 words. Of course, the text was very easy to read, but the challenges also came from the fact that the RCs and the VA questions did not appear separately as separate units, but they were jumbled. Of course, the questions of one RC appeared all together. So that navigation was a bit time-consuming and might have been a challenge. The second point, which is quite significant, is the absence of the para-jumbles. Probably not seen after CAT 2006. This was 1 year in history that we remember CAT did not have para-jumbles. Now, all of these things made the sectional rather challenging. The closeness of the options, highly inferential questions, the fact that para-jumbles were missing, therefore fewer theta questions, more of summary questions, more of para-completion questions. So what was the distribution? We had 4 RCs, of course, with 4 questions each, making for 16 questions, and 3 summary questions, 3 para-completion questions, and 2 odd sentence out questions. The RCs were fairly easy reads, as I mentioned earlier. However, the questions were really confusing, very close options. The easier RCs might have been the ones to do with the craftsmanship as well as the bandicoots one. The craftsmanship was about 512 words with fairly easy text, and that's why easy to moderate one. It was more of a SWOT analysis of craftsmanship itself. There were inferential questions, and that posed a slight challenge. The bandicoots passage might have been a little confusing to read because it had a lot of information in it, a lot of details, which might have even made you miss the actual argument. But the questions, a couple of them at least, were fairly easy inferences. The moderate RCs were the ones to do with streaming services and economists borrowing ideas from other disciplines. Both these were 512 and 514 words respectively. Now, the streaming services RC was relatable, but it had a strong argument. And unless you picked that argument, you would find that the questions couldn't be taken because all of the questions were based on that argument. The options were really long and fairly close. So that's where we rated moderate. The economics passage was a moderate read with some dense, jargon-heavy text. 3 of the inferential questions were rather challenging because they had really close options. With the summary questions, the paragraph on cartographers was really easy text with easy options. Animals sharing emotions with humans was moderate. It had an easy text but slightly confusing options. And the third summary, which had to do with language codes, was really a difficult one because the text was dense, the options were fairly close. Of the 2 odd sentence questions, one was an absolute sitter, the one that spoke about the decline in the use of urban public transport was very easy. That odd sentence was very, very easily identifiable. Whereas the other question, that of Singer's direct moral theory of animal rights, was difficult. The odd sentence couldn't easily be recognized. Likewise with para-completion. You had this question to do with Silk Roads, which was fairly easy. The brain organization also could be regarded as easy to moderate, but the Renaissance music one was definitely a moderate to difficult one because it had difficult sentences that couldn't be easily understood. What I've done here is discussed each of the questions in great detail. Each of the RCs have been discussed using the IMS 5-pause approach so that you have a sound understanding of the main idea of each RC and the elimination of every option in a question. I've also discussed each of the VA questions with a process in a certain manner so that you're able to relate to it easily. these processes, these approaches are believed to reduce inaccuracy. I hope our CAT 24 students are able to use this for a retrospect analysis. I hope our CAT 25 students and the future aspirants are able to use this video beneficially. With the VA and RC questions appearing jumbled up, some of us had a VA question to start the entire sectional. Now, this is an odd sentence question. Of the two odd sentence questions that appeared, this is clearly the more difficult one. In fact, it's quite challenging. The other is an easier one. Now, let's examine this. We'll try to summarize or label each sentence so that we can see what is the dominant theme. Sentence 1 talks about animals have an interest in fulfilling their basic needs, but also in avoiding suffering, and therefore we ought to extend moral consideration. So animals' interests, what are their interests? Fulfilling basic needs and avoiding suffering. Therefore, we need to give moral consideration. Second sentence introduces someone called Singer. He viewed himself as a utilitarian and he presents a direct moral theory concerning animal rights, and that is contrasted with indirect positions. So, Singer presents a direct moral theory about animal rights. 3. He argued for extending moral consideration to animals because similar to humans, animals have certain significant interests. Now, his argument was that we should extend moral consideration to animals because animals also have significant interests like humans. Similar to humans, animals also have significant interests. The event that publicly announced animal rights as a legitimate issue within contemporary philosophy was Peter Singer's animal liberation text. Once again, a mention of Peter Singer. This tells us that what publicly announced animal rights as a legitimate issue was this text by Peter Singer, Animal Liberation. 5. As such, therefore, because of this, we ought to view their interests alongside and equal to human interests, which results in humans having direct moral duties towards animals. Because of something, we ought to view their animals' interests alongside and equal to human interests. And what might this as such be a reference to? Probably 3. That animals have significant interests similar to humans, and that's why we ought to view their interests alongside and equal to human interests. So, animal and human interests are to be viewed equal, hence humans have a direct moral duty towards animals. We can clearly see that 3 and 5 are connected. 5 tries to conclude from the argument of 3. 2 and 4 are connected, or rather 4 and 2 are connected. There is this event which is Peter Singer's Animal Liberation text, and Singer presents a direct moral theory. So our theme can largely be Singer's direct moral theory of extending moral consideration for animals. But why does he say that we need to extend moral consideration for animals? Because they have interests that are similar to humans. Now that is the key. That is his argument, that their interests are similar to humans. And that's why we need to view their interests alongside human interests. Which means one that goes on to outline these interests as basic needs and avoiding suffering, which is trying to simplify the interests of animals, can be the odd sentence here, because we don't want to specify and simplify the interests here. All we are told is that animal interests are similar to human interests. So why would we want to list out or present very simple interests here, as in fulfilling their basic needs, avoiding suffering, which means that perhaps we can regard one as our odd sentence here. All other sentences seem to revolve around Singer's direct moral theory of extending moral consideration to animals because animals have significant interests similar to humans. We can regard this outlining of interests as different. So let's consider one as the odd sentence. Pretty difficult one, not easy, would be time consuming. This is one of the easier RCs of slot 1, with the content and the text being easy to read and understand. However, the questions required a complete understanding of the main point of the author. Without an understanding of the argument that the author is making, you wouldn't find the questions easy. Now, the first paragraph introduces a couple of instances by streaming services like HBO Max and Netflix, where they quietly removed some of the platform's offerings or even edited old episodes in a retroactive manner. That means that to take effect from a past date. So past episodes were edited to improve their visual effects. So the news that these things are happening, that is removing some offerings or editing them, etc., seemed like vindication, justification for those who had long warned that streaming was more about controlling access to the cultural commons than expanding it. Now, what is the cultural commons? Cultural commons is a concept that refers to shared intellectual resources and cultural resources where an entire community has these shared resources in a particular time and space. They all can access it. So the streaming services are trying to control access to our intellectual and artistic resources rather than expanding it. That is what people believed. And this news, these incidents seemed like they justified the fact that streaming services are actually controlling access to our shared intellectual and artistic resources rather than expanding it. So the topic of discussion clearly seems to be streaming services. The point being made in this paragraph is that the news of streaming services such as HBO Max and Netflix quietly removing or editing their offerings appeared to justify some people's opinion that streaming was more about controlling access to the cultural commons than expanding it. Now let's look at what is said in the next paragraph. In para 2, the author analyzes a commonly proposed solution and its limitations. What's less clear is whether the commonly prescribed cure for these cultural ills, which is a return to the material pleasures of physical media, is the right one. So what is the prescribed cure here? Returning to physical media. But it's less clear if that is the right solution. This is the commonly held solution for these cultural ills. And what are these cultural ills that we are talking about? The problem of streaming services controlling our access to the cultural commons. So what are these problems that he goes on to talk about? The makers of Blu-ray discs claim that they have a shelf life of 100 years, but that is still to be proven. It is largely theoretical and are dependent on storage conditions, not to mention that they also depend on continued availability of equipment that allows them to be played. Then there is the humble DVD, which is far less resilient, the author says, because many early releases are already beginning to deteriorate in quality. Then there are digital movie purchases. They provide even less security. The author mentions that any film bought on iTunes could disappear if you move to some other location, another territory, which has a different rights agreement with the producers of that film. In fact, he says that it's a bold new frontier in the commodification of art. In the buying and selling of art, this seems to be a new aspect, a new thing that is happening, which is the birth of the product recall. You launch a product and then you try to recall it. There is yet another anecdote quoted here of how a person tweeted that he lost access to Cars 2 after moving from Canada to Australia. And then Apple clarified to him that, look, on our devices, if you download films, you would retain permanent access to these downloads, even if you relocate to some other place where there is a different set of rights agreements. Thanks to the company's strong digital rights management technology. Apple has very strong digital rights management technology. But the problem is that such files cannot be moved or backed up, locking you into watching it with your Apple account. You can't watch it in any other way. You have to watch it with your Apple account. So basically you find that the different kinds of physical media where you can store digital content is being discussed and the problems connected with it are being talked about. So the commonly prescribed remedy for the control of streaming services over art is a return to the physical media, but going by the limitations of technology and different territorial rights agreements or what is called digital rights management, this does not appear to be the right solution. Now, Para 3 continues this idea. So even if you manage to get digital rights management free films, copies of films, your favorite films, which are digital rights management free, even then you have problems to deal with, which is the ever-changing file format standards, data decay. And how do you manage to deal with it? Only by regularly migrating files from one hard drive to another can delay the inevitable. You're not going to preserve them forever. You can delay the inevitable deterioration of these films. And this seems to be a Sisyphean battle against the ravages of digital time. A Sisyphean battle. Sisyphean relates to the myth of Sisyphus, which has a task that keeps going on and on, endlessly performing. The hero there performs the task endlessly. So Sisyphean battle is an unending task. So what are we talking about here? Even with DRM-free copies of films, there are problems such as changing file formats, data decay to deal with, which can be delayed by the regular migration of files among hard drives. Finally, in paras 4 and 5, I put them together here because the idea is connected. Para 4, the author says, in a sense, none of this is new. It is not as if it's only now that streaming services are controlling access, our access, the audience's access to cultural content. This happened in the past as well. The author quotes some instances here. Charlie Chaplin burned the negative of his 1926 film, A Woman of the Sea, because he wanted to write off some taxes that he had to pay. Many more films have been lost because of accident, negligence, or indifference. There is a mention of a Fox film vault that burned down, destroying a majority of the silent films produced by the studio. Back then, at least, cinema was defined by its ephemerality. Back then, we knew that films are ephemeral, transient, temporal. We didn't expect them to be permanent or everlasting. That was the idea we connected with our films. Because we believed that once a film showed at our local cinema, it was as good as gone after that. So a film that was as good as gone once it left your local cinema, that was our idea. But today, that is not our expectation. Today, you have film studios keen to stress the breadth of their back catalogs. Back catalogs refer to the entirety of the productions of that art house, that cinema house, or an artist's complete range of productions. So film studios stress on the range of the collections that they have, the productions that they have. Or to put it in Hollywood terms, that's the value of their IPs, intellectual property. So because film studios, art companies stress on this, audiences may start to wonder why those same studios seem happy to set the vault alight, set the vault on fire themselves, if it will help next quarter's numbers. So the question that the author is raising in this last line is, if they are promoting the breadth, the range of their artistic collections and movies, then why should they themselves try to do away with some movies or edit some movies retroactively, etc., just so that they are able to improve on their revenues temporarily? So the author started with this idea and ends with the same thing. So what exactly is the argument that we're going to capture here? The losing of films is not new and has instances in the past. But back then, cinema was seen as ephemeral, transient, which is not the case today, where film studios stress on the range of their back catalogs, raising questions on the losing of films for temporary gains, losing or editing of films for temporary gains. Now, let's do a quick recap and look at what our main idea can be. So the idea is introduced in para 1 by the author that there are these streaming services that are quietly removing or editing their offerings, which seems to support the general idea or general fear that people have that streaming services are controlling access to this collection of art or intellectual resources that we have called the cultural commons rather than expanding it. And then in para 2, there is a remedy, the commonly prescribed remedy, which is shifting to physical media. But there are a lot of limitations that most of the physical media have, the limitations of technology. There is this question of differential territorial rights agreement. And therefore, this doesn't seem to be the right solution. And even if you are able to do away with differential territorial rights, there are still problems of technology like changing file formats, data decay, etc. The author finally comes to the idea that he brings up in the first paragraph, which is the loss of films for varied reasons, whether they are being removed or edited retroactively, etc. It has instances in the past, but back then cinema was seen as ephemeral, and that's not the case today, because now you see that film studios stress on the range of their back catalogs. Then why are they trying to tamper with films? So the main idea can be put together in this way. In an age where film studios pride themselves on the breadth of their back catalogs, it is surprising that streaming services are removing or editing their offerings, justifying the idea that streaming controls access to the cultural commons rather than expanding it. A return to the physical media is not a viable solution, given the limitations of technology and different territorial rights, agreements, or DRM. Let's look at the first question now. An inferential question with really close options, so not a very easy one. Which of the following statements is suggested by the sentence, back then at least, cinema was defined by its ephemerality, the sense that a film was as good as gone once it left your local cinema? Now, where is this sentence placed in para 5? Let's understand the context of this sentence. Para 4 discusses, in a sense, none of this is new, and it goes on to quote some instances of how movies were lost in the past. So the this here refers to the loss of movies, the editing of movies retroactively that Netflix has been accused of doing, or the quiet removing of certain offerings from the services. So the this refers to that. And then we have this sentence, back then at least, our expectations were different with cinema because we saw cinema as ephemeral, temporary, impermanent, because we believed that a film was as good as gone once it left your local cinema. But today, we have different expectations. Because you have film studios or such streaming services, companies that control all of these movies, you have film studios that stress, that take great pride on the breadth or the range of their back catalogs, their collections, their productions, and so the value of their IPs. That's where we begin to wonder, why are they themselves editing those movies or losing or removing those movies? Why are they themselves setting fire to those movies just to help their revenues temporarily? So our shadow answer here will have to be that in the past, losing films, though unfortunate, could have been accepted because movies were believed to be available as long as they were in the local cinema. But today our expectations are different. With today's emphasis by film studios on the range of their back catalogs, films are expected to be available for longer. Now let's look at the options. Option 1. Today, films are expected to be available for a long time since they are no longer tied solely to their stay at the local cinema. Exactly what our shadow answer has been. We expect films to be available for longer because films are not just screened at the movies. You have streaming services, you have digitized content, etc. So we expect them to be available for longer. So 1 seems to be good. Let's park 1 and look at 2. Option 2. Presently, there is no reason why film studios should remove access to films once they have left the local cinema. The author isn't saying that there is no reason. He makes a clear contrast between our expectations from cinema in the past and our current expectations. Why are we surprised? Why do audiences wonder as to why film studios are taking away content, removing our access to content, or retroactively editing things, etc.? Why do we wonder? Because our expectations from these film studios and movies and streaming services is different today. We expect them to be around for longer because we no longer tie these movies to just the local cinema. So the author isn't saying that there is no reason. This sentence serves the purpose of creating a contrast in the expectations of the audience of the past and the expectations of the present audience in today's ecosystem. So 2 cannot be our answer. It doesn't clearly capture the nuance of what the author is saying. Let's eliminate 2. Option 3, cinema is now no longer as ephemeral as it used to be earlier because the technology used for creating and preserving films has improved manifold. Now, the problem with this is that the author isn't really glorifying technology and saying that technology has improved manifold and therefore we have different ways of preserving our movies. In fact, in paras 2 and 3, the author highlights the issues that the so-called solution to this problem has, which is returning to physical media. He goes on to talk about the limitations that this technology offers, the problems of the DVD, the problems of, say, differential rights management, etc. So, the author doesn't really glorify technology and say that the technology that we have helps us here. Secondly, this is not the point that the author is trying to create with this sentence. With this sentence, he's trying to create a contrast, as mentioned earlier, between our expectations of cinema of the past, in the past, and our expectations of cinema in the present. That contrast is not captured by 3. 4. Around a century ago, people were more accepting of not having access to films once they left the local cinema. Once again, this doesn't capture that contrast. All we are saying here is that we accepted that movies are ephemeral in the past. But what about the current times? What is our expectation of the current times? That's not captured here, which means that 4 again doesn't really capture the point being made by this particular sentence in the given context. 1 is the best one, and it matches our shadow answer as well. Which one of the following statements about art best captures the arguments made in the passage? If you've understood the main point of this RC, then this shouldn't be a very difficult question. Now, what is our main idea? We've narrowed it down to this, that in an age where film studios pride themselves on the breadth of their back catalogs, it is quite surprising that streaming services are removing or editing their offerings, justifying the idea that streaming controls access to the cultural commons rather than expanding it. A return to the physical media is not a viable solution given the limitations of technology and the problems connected with different territorial rights agreement, etc. So the shadow answer that we have is that streaming services were expected to expand our access to art, intellectual resources, but they appear to control our access today. And that's where the examples of editing, removing of offerings by HBO Max and Netflix are given. And technology and digital rights management pose their own set of issues. Let's look at the options. Option 1. Accepting retroactive changes to works of art is dangerous because it will encourage creators to not put enough effort into the original attempt, given that they can always edit or update their work later. Remember that the focus of the passage is not on creators of content or art, artists, etc. It is not about what are those things that will encourage creators to give their best output or discourage them. There is no discussion of artists and the content that they create. It is about the way in which you have platforms, you have streaming services that control access rather than allowing us to access more and more content. So clearly 1 does not capture the focus of the passage. Option 2. Works of art belong to the cultural commons and hence must remain available forever in perpetuity, irrespective of who pays for access to them. Ideally, yes, this is the ideal scenario, that it must belong to the cultural commons and people should have access. They must remain there forever because they are works of art. But this might just be the assumption of the author. It is not the argument that he makes in this passage. This is an ideal scenario that the author might expect. But the argument that he is making here is that this is not so because we have streaming services and others who control access. They limit our access to the cultural commons. They are supposed to expand our access to the cultural commons, but they are not doing so. So that argument is not captured in 2. 2 only presents an ideal scenario. Let's eliminate 2. 3. In the age of online subscription services, it is time to change our understanding of classic works of art being primarily immutable, unchanging, and easily available to the public. The author isn't asking us to change our understanding of our expectation of artwork being permanent and non-changing. He doesn't want us to change our understanding. What he says is that it's surprising. That's the question that he raises at the end too. That in today's scenario where there's so much pride being taken on the volume and the range of your work, why are you? Audiences may start to wonder why those studios are trying to edit them, retroactively change them, or remove our access to such content. So it's a question that the author raises. He doesn't ask us to change our understanding. He says audiences may start to wonder. We find it surprising that such content is not available for us and does not last for longer. So 3 is clearly a distortion of the main idea. 4. As art is increasingly created, stored, and distributed digitally, access to it is counterintuitively likely to be made more difficult by the rapid churn in technology and the whims of host platforms. What is counterintuitive? Contrary to common sense. Our expectation from the digitized content today is that we need to get more and more access. We want streaming services and such other platforms to expand our access. But that's not happening. The reverse seems to be happening. They seem to control our access to the cultural commons. So now that is contrary to common sense. Access to it is counterintuitively likely to be made difficult by the rapid churn of technology, the different changes, the territorial rights agreements, etc., and the whims and the fancies of host platforms, where streaming services and film studios seem to be acting on their own without clear rationales for it. So 4 clearly captures the most important argument of this passage. 4 it is. Netflix had begun editing old episodes of Stranger Things to retroactively improve their visual effects. What is the purpose of this example used in the passage? A logical structure question. All we'll have to do is go back to where this example is given and look at what is the point being made. Now, the point being made is given right above this example. The example is mentioned here that Netflix had begun editing old episodes of Stranger Things, and that report has been since denied by the show's creators. However, the news of all this, and what is said earlier is the news about HBO Max, all this news seemed like vindication, justification to those who had always warned that streaming services are more controlling access to the cultural commons rather than expanding it. So our shadow answer is this. This example highlights that people's warning about streaming services controlling access to the cultural commons than expanding it appeared to be justified. Let's look at the options. To show a practice that justifies the fears of people who feel streaming services cannot be trusted to be custodians of cultural artifacts like film. Can this be our answer? There are 2 parts to what our answer has to be. One is that people were warning, people opined that streaming was trying to restrict our access rather than expand our access. They believed that. And this example or this news justified their beliefs or their opinion, their warnings. So is this a practice that justifies the fears of people who felt that streaming services are trying to control our access to cultural commons? Yes. Both the parts of our expected answer are seen in option 1. Let's keep option 1. Option 2. To show that art in the digital age, specifically film, is no longer sacrosanct and may be changed to suit changing tastes or technology. Art is not sacrosanct, art is changed. But who is making these changes? The fact that the streaming services are making these changes, and by doing so they are restricting our access to availability of art, now that's missing here. The second point is that the vindication part, that people felt justified about what they believed, that is again not captured here. So 2 is incorrect. Option 3, to show how unsubstantiated reports, yes, the reports are not supported. They have been denied by the show's creators. So unsubstantiated reports are leading to an increase in the level of distrust towards streaming services. Now you're generalizing when you say that they are increasing the level of distrust towards streaming services. The distrust is to do with something specific, that people believed, people warned that streaming was trying to control access rather than expand our access. Now that is what they feel justified with. So this idea cannot be generalized to mean that you distrust streaming services completely. The distrust is to do with a specific aspect of what streaming services are doing. So this becomes generic. It's a generalized option. Let's eliminate 3. Option 4, to show that streaming services are controlling access to the cultural commons rather than expanding it. Now this misses on one other aspect here, which is that people's warnings or people's opinion felt vindicated, felt justified. The fact that streaming services are doing this justified the opinion that people had, and that is missing in option 4, which means option 4 is also incorrect. We come back to 1 because 1 very clearly captures the 2 aspects that this particular example serves. The fact that it justifies people's idea, and 2, the view regarding streaming controlling access rather than expanding it. Which one of the following statements, if true, would best invalidate or weaken the main argument of the passage? Now let's go back to the main argument and keep this with us. Now we know what our main argument is. Now what is a shadow answer here? What would we expect to weaken this idea? A shadow answer can be anything that goes on to say that studios and streaming services do not alter, do not edit or lose films, digital content. They don't quietly remove viewers' access to certain offerings. They do not control viewers' access to films, digital content. So this is a shadow answer. Let's look at the options. Studios and streaming services have committed to giving customers perpetual, continuous, and platform-independent access to the original digital content they have paid for. They are not playing with it. They are not tampering with it. They are providing clear and open access to viewers. They are not trying to control our access to the cultural commons. They are, on the contrary, providing perpetual, continuous, and platform-independent access to original digital content. No retroactive changes, etc. Now this one seems good because it captures the shadow answer that we have. Option 2. Recent research has irrefutably proven that Blu-ray discs have a shelf life of at least 100 years. Now you can see that all of this is part of para 2 and a bit of para 3 continues that idea, which are those arguments that are being made against physical media as a solution. The author proposes physical media as a solution to these cultural ills in the second paragraph. But then he goes on to discuss the limitations. So the makers of Blu-ray discs claim that they have a shelf life of 100 years, but the idea is largely theoretical and it hasn't yet been proven. So now if we say that research has irrefutably proven that Blu-ray discs have a shelf life of at least 100 years, that only invalidates one of the minor arguments of the passage, an argument that is made against the physical media. This is not the main argument. Our main argument is seen in the main idea. So 2 is a minor argument. 3, improved cloud storage services have made it possible for movie collections to now be preserved in perpetuity without the need to keep migrating the files. The need to keep migrating the files because of problems with data storage, etc. Now all of that is again one of the discussions to do with technology and their limitations. It's all part of paras 2 and 3. So once again, this doesn't invalidate the main argument. This rather weakens a minor argument or one of the supporting arguments. Let's eliminate 3. 4. When moving to a different geographical location, customers can easily use VPNs to bypass geo-blocking and regain access to their content on any streaming service. Once again, this is a supporting argument. The point that different areas, different territories have different rights, agreements, and easy access needs to be managed, digital rights management needs to be done, etc. All of this are minor arguments, the arguments about technology and the challenges that they pose. So the moment you see 2, 3, and 4, they are very easy for you to eliminate when you are able to distinguish that these belong to a set of discussions regarding technology and the barriers or challenges that it presents. So option 1 is the best weakening statement, something that invalidates our main idea or main argument. This passage is an analysis of craftsmanship, what it is, what are the strengths that it has, and what are its challenges. You'll find that there is no very strong argument here. So the questions are also fairly specific detail or inferential and are based in certain instances or locations of the passage. So the questions are not really very difficult. But because this passage is a long one and there's a lot of information being presented, it can get a little tedious. So the first paragraph presents the idea of craftsmanship. It's not just nostalgia for the past, yearning or longing for the past. Crafts and craftsmanship require distinct skills. They require certain specific approaches as an all-round approach to work, because you're not going to look at just the parts itself. You're not specialized in certain areas, but you look at the entire product. That's what a craftsman does. An attitude that involves devotion to the job, a focus on the communal interest. The concept of craft emphasizes the human touch and individual judgment. So the first paragraph establishes the requirements of craftsmanship. Clearly, we're talking about craftsmanship. What is the argument here? Craftsmanship involves distinct skills, an all-round approach to work, a devotion to the job, a focus on the communal interest, and an emphasis on the human touch and individual judgment. How does this continue? In paras 2 and 3, the author contrasts artisanship or craftsmanship, which represents the traditional way of making things. We had artisan communities, etc., against the modern management way of making things. Essentially, the crafts concept seems to run against the preponderant or the dominant ethos of management studies, which have long prioritized efficiency and consistency. What is the priority for management? Efficiency, consistency. So standardization, basically. Craft skills, in contrast with the ethos of management, were portrayed as being primitive and traditionalist because they represented a very traditional way of making things. So the contrast between artisanship and efficiency first came to the fore in the 19th century. This was especially when in America, across the Atlantic that is, you had firms that developed the American system using standardized parts. For example, the Singer sewing machine. It showed the potential of a mass-produced device. So we are now talking of mass production using standardized methods, standardized machines, etc. in factories. This process created its own reaction. So what was the response of the traditional ways of craftsmanship or artisanship to this modern way of making things? There was its own reaction, first in the form of the arts and crafts movement of the late 19th century. Then again, there was another movement that came about, which is Small is Beautiful movement. And then there is a third crafts movement emerging as people become aware of the environmental effects or impact of that conventional industrialization or mass production. So, what is the point being made in these two paragraphs? We are contrasting artisanship or craftsmanship and the efficiency ethos of management studies, which first came to the fore in the 19th century when British manufacturers faced competition from the American firms. And then it led to several reactionist movements, such as the arts and crafts movement, the smallest beautiful movement, and then the third emerging movement of environmental impact. To take this ahead, you find that in para 4, there is a discussion of the consumers for craftsmanship. So there are two potential markets, the author says. The first market comes from consumers who are willing to pay a premium price for high quality goods that have extra quality. The second market are those consumers who want to use their purchases to support local workers, local production, or reduce the environmental impact of mass production, factory production, by taking goods to craftspeople to be recycled, to be mended, etc. So, craftsmanship has two types of consumers, one who is willing to pay a premium price for quality goods, and the other who wants to support local workers or reduce environmental impact. So, we so far have a discussion of craftsmanship and the distinct skills that it requires, craftsmanship versus the modern management way of efficient standardized production, and the current markets that we have for craftsmanship. Para 5 discusses things from the worker's point of view, that is, the point of view of the craftsman. For workers, what is the appeal of craftsmanship? It gives them the freedom to make creative choices and thus makes their job very satisfying. And in that sense, it could actually be hope for the overall labor market, that more and more people make these choices, express their creativity and their talent, and are very fulfilled with their jobs. Let the dull and repetitive tasks be mechanized. Let the machines take care of them. Let workers or craftsmen focus purely on their skills, judgment, and imagination. There is an example given of the Agile manifesto in the software sector. Now, the pioneers behind this original Agile manifesto or Agile thought process, they promised to prioritize individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So, they brought together experts from different teams, and thus Agile working is designed to improve creativity because they are not focused on standardized processes and tools, rather they are focused on individuals and interactions of individuals, therefore individuality and creativity. So this is the Agile manifesto in the software sector, which is an example for creative focus. And the author gives this example to talk about how craftsmanship also appeals to workers because it lets them express their creativity. So the craftsmen get the autonomy to make creative choices and thus a satisfying job, leaving the dull, repetitive tasks to machines. To take this ahead, in paragraph 6 and 7, the author discusses the challenges that craftsmanship faces. The broader question, he says, is whether crafts can create a lot more jobs than they do today. There is a lot of demand for crafted products. But then, is it possible for you to retrain workers that come from other sectors? There are sectors that are getting automated, which means those workers lose their jobs. Can we retrain these workers and get them to create crafts? That's not easy. Retraining them for craftsmanship, giving them those specific skills is not an easy thing. And in a world where products and services have to pass through so many regulations, there are so many governmental laws and regulations that have to be complied with. Large companies will have the advantage. Individuals can't really get through these things easily. Para 7 gives us another example from history. What is this example from history? Medieval craft guilds. They tell us that the links between crafts and creativity is not automatic. What is a medieval craft guild? A guild is an association of artisans, different types of artisans that came together. They existed largely during the Middle Ages, the 11th to 16th, 17th centuries, etc. That is before industrialization happened. But they actually posed problems. They were monopolies. They resisted new joinees. New entrants were not easily allowed to join. They were also hierarchical. They expected the young men, the juniors, to work for a long time as assistants, apprentices, or learners before they could establish on their own. And of course, by that time, because of the long duration, their innovative spirit would get killed. Craft workers can thrive in the modern era, the author says, but only if they take learnings from what happened with the medieval craft guilds and don't get too organized. So the arguments here in these two paragraphs ends up being the challenges for crafts lie in creating a lot more new jobs by retraining workers. And large companies have the advantage in today's world of regulations. The experience of medieval craft guilds also teaches us that craft workers can thrive in the modern era only if they don't get too organized and form their associations. So, what exactly can be our main idea? We understand that we are discussing craftsmanship, how it contrasts with a modern way of making things or management ethos of efficiency and standardization, the consumers or the market for craftsmanship, the benefits for the crafts worker from this field, and the challenges that this field faces in today's times. So the main idea can be putting all these ideas together. While craftsmanship requires distinct skills and contrasts with the management ethos of efficiency, it has two potential markets and provides the craftsman a satisfying job with creative choices. However, it faces challenges in creating more new jobs in today's world and the potential dangers from getting too organized like the medieval craft guilds. Let's look at the questions now. This question can be a little challenging if you don't figure this question's stem. It talks about the most recent revival in interest in the crafts, and there is no explicit mention of most recent revival in interest in the crafts is a result of the emergence of all of the following except. So you wonder what part to go back to. Now when you look at the options, you will realize that these options are discussed largely in the fourth paragraph. And we figure that when we're talking about the two potential markets and the kinds of consumers that are available, this is the existing interest in craftsmanship. In any case, in para 3 towards the end, we're also talking about an emerging consciousness of the environmental impact of conventional industry. So that paragraph talks about the three movements that were a response to the mass production standardized methods that had emerged. So we figure that para 4 that talks about the potential consumers is the recent revival in interest in the crafts. Now, it's pretty easy once you figure that out. The shadow answers here will be that yes, there is one set of consumer who's willing to pay a premium price for goods that have extra quality. The second set of consumers are those who wish to support local workers and local production. They also wish to reduce the environmental impact by mending existing goods or recycling goods with the craftspeople. Now look at the options. A niche market for discerning buyers of quality products. The revival in interest in the crafts is because there are consumers who are willing to pay a premium price for goods of extra quality. So yes, those discerning buyers who are looking for extra quality, they exist. That's why there is a revival in interest. 2. Concerns about the environmental impact of mass production. Yes, they wish to reduce the environmental impact by taking goods to be mended, etc. So this has also triggered the revival in interest in crafts. 3. A greater interest in buying locally produced goods. Yes, that's also what they wish to do. They wish to support local workers. Support for individual creations as opposed to mass-produced objects. Now that is not mentioned as potential consumers, meaning that doesn't seem to be the drive for consumers to come to craftspeople. At least that's not mentioned here. So 4 is our exception. This is not what has triggered the recent revival in interest in the crafts. So 4 is our answer. We can infer from the passage that medieval crafts guilds resembled mass production in that both. Now I've highlighted the word resembled. That's what we're looking for. What is the resemblance between medieval craft guilds and mass production? Now, what do we understand about mass production? From para 3, we understand that it's contrasted with artisanship. The contrast between artisanship and efficiency. And efficiency is what the management ethos is all about, which is represented by this American system of using standardized parts, mass producing devices, etc. So mass production essentially is standardized, efficient production. Now, what do we understand about medieval crafts guilds? That they were monopolies, they resisted new entrants, they got their young people to have long periods of training, and by that time the innovative spirit in them, the creativity in them may have been knocked out of them. So our shadow answer is understanding that mass production focuses on standardization, efficient standardization, and is contrasted with artisanship. Artisanship represents creativity. Medieval craft guilds resisted new entrants, destroyed the innovative spirit in young men with their long apprenticeships, which means again medieval craft guilds, instead of encouraging creativity, subdued the creativity. Now let's look at the options. Focused excessively on product quality. Perhaps mass production does that, we don't know, they are standardized. But then that is not the resemblance with the craft guilds. So let's eliminate 1, 2. Discouraged innovation by restricting entry through strict rules. Now this is what the medieval craft guilds did. That is not its resemblance with standardization or mass production. So let's eliminate 2. 3. Did not always employ egalitarian or equal production processes. Now there is no explicit mention of egalitarian production processes, but we can perhaps connect standardized production processes with mass production. But that's not connected with medieval craft guilds. So that is not the resemblance again. 4. Did not necessarily promote creativity. The resemblance between medieval craft guilds and mass production is that both ended up subduing creativity. They didn't necessarily promote creativity. So 4 will have to be our answer because that is our shadow answer. Which one of the following statements is not inconsistent with the views stated in the passage? So what we're looking for here is what is consistent or what agrees with the passage. Now let's look at each option. Creativity in the crafts could be stifled, could be restricted if the market for artisan goods becomes too organized. This is explicitly said in para 7. The author's warning to craftsmanship is that craft workers can thrive in the modern era, but only if they take lessons from the medieval craft guilds and don't get too organized. So yes, if the market for artisan goods becomes too organized, it might go the way of the medieval craft guilds. So this is consistent with the passage because the passage explicitly states this. Now let's hold this. Look at option 2. The agile movement in software is a throwback. A throwback is going back to something of the past times, to the tenets or the principles of the medieval crafts guilds. Now let's look at the agile movement and what it was meant to. Para 5 tells us this. By bringing together experts from different teams, agile working is designed to improve creativity. Now the purpose of bringing these individuals, creative individuals together was to improve creativity. And we find that there is a criticism of the medieval craft guilds that is presented in para 7, where we are told that they were monopolies, they had hierarchical structures, they resisted new entrants, they gave a long training period to the new joinees, thereby subduing or stifling the innovative spirit or creativity in them. Which means that the purpose of the agile movement does not align with the principles or what medieval craft guilds were doing. So 2 is not consistent with the passage. Let's eliminate this. Option 3. The arts and crafts movement was initially inspired by the American system of production. Now to be inspired by something is to follow in its footsteps. But that's not what happened with the arts and crafts movement. This process, the process that is being talked about, is the American system of production, mass production, standardized production, etc. It created its own reaction. So the arts and crafts movement was a reactionist movement. Now a reactionist movement is not similar to something, a movement that is inspired by something and follows in its footsteps. So 3 is inconsistent with the passage. Let's eliminate it. 4. We need to support the crafts. Only then can we retain the creativity intrinsic to their production. Now that second part which says only by supporting the crafts Can we retain the creativity intrinsic to their production? That is questionable, because at no point does the author explicitly say that by just being nostalgic or supporting the crafts, can we retain the creativity that is part of craftsmanship. The first paragraph very clearly says this: the idea of craftsmanship is not simply nostalgia. You don't just long for the past times, the past crafts that were created, but craftsmanship requires distinct skills, an all-round approach to work, devotion to the job, communal interest, human touch, individual judgment, etc. So there are many things that go in the making of creative crafts. So 4 is not an idea that is consistent with the passage. Let's eliminate that. We come back to 1. 1 is clearly that which is explicitly stated and therefore our answer. This question too, like the other questions, is fairly direct, based in some particular paragraph, and therefore rather on the easy side. The author questions the ability of crafts to create substantial employment opportunities presently, because now we know that discussion of employment opportunities or creating of a lot more jobs than they do today is discussed in para 6. Can crafts create a lot more jobs than they do today? The author raises 2 issues here. He says that there seems to be a lot of demand for crafted products, but will it be easy to retrain workers coming from sectors that got automated, which means that they are jobless? Can we retrain them? And we are living in a world where products and services have to go through a lot of regulations. So large companies will have the advantage. Individuals or maybe smaller groups or firms cannot tackle this or cannot easily deal with this. So our shadow answer would be these 2 reasons. 1, it may not be easy to retrain workers from other sectors that get automated. Large companies have the advantage in a world where products and services have to pass through regulatory hoops. Let's look at the options. Workers made redundant by automation are unlikely to opt for crafts-related work. Now, this is your tricky option here. What this says is that workers who've lost their jobs because automation has taken over their jobs, they are unlikely to opt for crafts-related work. Now, that is not presented as an issue here. The author presents retraining of such workers as an issue. It won't be easy to retrain workers coming from other sectors. It is not about they being unlikely to opt for craftsmanship. So 1 is not a challenge that the author offers regarding creating substantial employment opportunities. So 1 can be eliminated. Let's look at 2. The low scale of crafts production will not be able to absorb the mass of redundant labor. This is again not our shadow answer. It is not said here. In fact, we don't even know if there is going to be a low scale of crafts production, because the demand for crafted products may rise, which means that the scale of crafts production also may rise. So to say that it will not be able to absorb the large number of people who are left jobless because of automation, that is not discussed at all here. 3. Craft guilds tend to resist new entrants and are unlikely to accept large numbers of trainees. Now, craft guilds are not explicitly talked about here. The medieval craft guilds and the problems or the learnings that they give is discussed in para 7. However, that craft guilds tend to resist new entrants. We don't know anything about current craft guilds. We are only discussing things about medieval craft guilds. So this is again not one of the things that the author poses as a challenge for creating craftsmanship jobs. 3 can be eliminated. It any which ways doesn't match with our shadow answer. Regulatory requirements could make it difficult for small crafts outfits to compete. Now, this is exactly one of the reasons that the author presents, which means this can be our answer. This is one of the reasons why the author questions the ability of crafts to create substantial employment opportunities. This summary question is not an easy one. I would rate it as a moderate one, not because the text is difficult. The text is quite easy for us to understand. And while reading, the ideas are also easily figured. But that's exactly the problem. We figure a set of ideas and we expect those ideas in the options. But none of the options cover all of those ideas. So when you get to the options, you find them a little tricky and they can derail you slightly, which is why I would rate this question as moderate. Now, what are we talking about? The first sentence tells us that many animals are very intelligent and they have sensory and motor abilities that dwarf ours. So many animals have intelligence, sensory and motor abilities superior to those of humans. And then there are examples given. There is the example of dogs that are able to detect diseases such as cancer and diabetes, warn humans of impending danger. Then there is the example of elephants, whales, hippopotamus, giraffes, alligators that use low-frequency sounds to communicate over long distances. Both of these are examples for the superior intelligence, sensory and motor abilities that animals have, some animals have. Then we have another point coming in. Many animals also display wide-ranging emotions, and then the emotions are listed out. When you see an also here, you would think of this idea as a secondary one. But that's not what the options indicate. So, many animals also display wide-ranging emotions. Now, Z talks about it's not surprising that animals share many emotions with us because we also share brain structures located in the limbic system that are the seat of our emotions. So, animals sharing many emotions with humans is not surprising. Why? Because human and animal brain structure is similar. Now, let's look at the options. Option 1. The advanced sensory and motor abilities of animals is the reason why they can display wide-ranging emotions. Now, this is clearly a misrepresentation. The cause and the effect are completely incorrect here. The advanced sensory and motor abilities of animals are not why they can display wide-ranging emotions. We are told in the last sentence that's because human and animal brain structures are similar. So we can easily eliminate 1 because it's a misrepresentation and distortion of ideas. Look at option 2. Animals are more intelligent than us in sensing danger and detecting diseases. Now we can't really generalize this idea to all animals. The discussion is that many animals are very intelligent. The example that is given of sensing danger and detecting diseases is that of the dogs. Dogs are said to have this ability of sensing danger, detecting diseases. You can't generalize that to all animals. So 2 is a clear generalization. The similarity in brain structure explains why animals show emotions typically associated with humans. Now this is our point Z. We are talking about many animals display wide-ranging emotions and the reason for it is given in Z. So Y and Z are kind of covered in option 3. Option 4, animals can show emotions which are typically associated with humans. Now this is correct. However, it doesn't really give you the reason. Why are animals able to show emotions which are typically associated with humans? 3 covers that. Because of the similarity in brain structure, which means between 3 and 4, 3 is more comprehensive, seems to cover the last 2 points at least. Let's consider 3 as our correct option here. This is an easy para-completion question. You'll find that the given sentence gives you a clear clue. And using that clue, you can place the given sentence in the right place in the given paragraph. What is the given clue? The given sentence says, understanding Central Asia's role helps developments make more sense not only across Asia, but in Europe, the Americas and Africa. So the subject used here is understanding Central Asia's role helps developments make more sense. As you read the paragraph, we realize that we're talking of the nations of the Silk Roads and their significance in connecting different continents in trade and development. As you begin reading these sentences, you will also recognize that the plural pronoun is used throughout. We are referring to these countries, they have carried. And this obviously is a reference to the nations of the Silk Roads. The only singular pronoun used here ends up being in the sentence after blank for it allows us to see patterns. And we also realize that the only singular subject used appears in the given sentence, understanding Central Asia's role. So, do we require this given sentence in the first blank? Not really, because there is a coherence here. The sentence before talks of the nations of the Silk Roads. These countries given after indicates coherence. Central Asia's role has not yet been referred to. So clearly 1 can be eliminated. Now 2 also continues the same thing. These countries lie at the center of global affairs. They have since the beginning of time, etc., etc. They have carried not only prosperity but also death and violence, disease and disaster. So we are continuing the discussion of the nations of the Silk Roads, which means I can't have the given sentence in blank 2. Can I place the given sentence in blank 3? Have we yet referred to understanding Central Asia's role? The previous sentence talks of they have carried not only prosperity but also death and violence, etc. And then the sentence after says the Silk Roads are the world's central nervous system. Once again the plural reference, the Silk Roads are the world's central nervous system. And when you look at the sentence after blank 4, it allows us to see, can the it here refer to the Silk Roads in the previous sentence? No, it cannot. Which means I can't place the sentence that talks about understanding Central Asia's role in blank 3, because then it will have no reference, no subject to refer to. It cannot refer to the Silk Roads. It has to refer to something singular. And that's where we figure that it has to fit in blank 4. What allows us to see patterns and links, causes and effect? Understanding Central Asia's role helps developments make more sense. So Central Asia's role allows us to see patterns and links, causes and effects, etc. This means that the given sentence can only fit in blank 4, nowhere else. So blank 4 is presented as option 1, which means option 1, blank 4 is our correct answer. This is definitely a difficult summary question. The text itself is quite dense. Making sense of what the text is saying is challenging. Therefore, naturally, we would end up choosing the incorrect option. Now, this talks about certain codes that may be so widely distributed in a specific language, community, or culture. So now we know that these codes are connected to a language or language community or culture, a group of people that's using a certain language or culture. They may be learned at an early age, so early an age that they appear not to be constructed but quite natural. So the first sentence talks about some codes of language. Let's take them as some sort of expressions of language. They are learned so early that they appear to be not created, constructed codes. They appear quite natural. And then there is a further explanation with the word simple visual signs. There can be just visual signs. They appear to have achieved a near universality in this sense, though evidence is yet to be seen that even apparently natural visual codes are culture specific. So let's just understand this sentence as visual signs or visual codes. Let's put these two sentences as certain codes of language and visual signs may be widely distributed, learned very early, that they appear natural, and the natural is given in inverted commas here. The next point, however, there's a contradiction. This does not mean that no codes have intervened, rather that the codes have been profoundly naturalized. Now what are we talking about here? Just because it appears like we've learned these codes so naturally, doesn't mean that these codes are not constructed, codes are not being given or intervened. It just means that the codes have been profoundly naturalized. This does not mean constructed codes, created codes don't exist. The codes can be signs, expressions, etc. But it means that the codes have been profoundly naturalized. They have been made to appear natural. And then the next sentence, the operation of naturalized codes reveals not the transparency and naturalness of language, but the depth, habituation, and near universality of the codes in use. Just because we have these codes that are easily learned, that they appear almost natural, doesn't mean that language is transparent or natural. But it only means that the depth, the habituation and near universality of these codes. Why are they easy to learn for us? Why do they appear so natural? Because they are deeply embedded in our cultures. We are so habituated to them. They are nearly universal. They are present everywhere. That's why they appear quite natural. They produce apparently natural recognitions. And this has the effect of concealing the practices of coding which are present. Because they appear so natural, what does it reveal? It reveals the depth, habituation and near universality of the codes. And that produces apparently natural recognitions of the codes. It hides the practices of coding. It hides the fact that it is created, the code is constructed. So what are we talking about here? There are certain codes or visual signs of language that are so widely distributed, seen everywhere, they are learned so easily, they appear very natural. This does not mean that constructed codes don't exist. All it means is that they have been so much naturalized. And why have they become so natural? Because they are habitual to us, they are nearly universal, and they produce natural recognitions. Therefore, they hide the practices or constructions of codes. Let's look at the options now. Not all codes are natural, but certain codes are naturalized and made to appear universal. Ideology aims to hide the mechanism of coding behind signs. Ideology doesn't aim to hide the mechanism. That's just mentioned in passing at the end. The entire idea is reversed here. Certain codes are naturalized and made to appear universal? No. Why are codes naturalized? Why do they appear naturalized? Because they are deep, habituated to us, near universal. And that's why they make them appear natural to us. And they hide the practices of coding. So this is a clear distortion. We are not saying that certain codes are naturalized and made to appear universal. They are universal. They are so widely distributed. That's why their learning appears quite natural to us. The second sentence, the ideology bit, is a complete distortion. So let's eliminate one. Language and visual signs are codes. Yes, that's what we pick from the beginning. However, some of the codes are so widespread that they not only seem naturally given, but also hide the mechanism of coding behind the signs. Can we consider this? All of the ideas are quite right. We figure from the beginning itself that we are talking about certain codes of language and visual signs. So language and visual signs are codes. Some of them are so widespread, they are learned very easily, that they appear natural. That is the second part here. They are so profoundly naturalized that they make us recognize them naturally, and they hide the practices of coding. That doesn't mean that constructed codes don't exist, but they hide the practices or the mechanism of coding behind the signs. They don't appear to us like they've been constructed. They appear natural to us. 2 has no distortions. 2 captures the essential ideas here. Let's look at 3. All codes, linguistic and visual, have a natural origin. They're clearly distorting from the start itself. Certain codes of language and visual signs, we're not talking of all codes and visual signs. So clearly a generalization. We may not even want to read this further, but to quickly have a glance, they have a natural origin. Some are so widespread that they become universal. That's again a distortion. They don't have a natural origin. They are so universal, they are so widespread that they appear natural. So 3 can be eliminated. Option 4. Learning linguistic and visual signs at an early age makes all such codes appear natural. That's not the only reason why certain codes appear natural. They are widely distributed. They are learned very early. They are deep, habituated to humans, near universal. So some of these ideas are missing here. This is not the only reason why it makes such codes appear natural. This naturalization of codes is the effect of ideology. That is definitely not a point made. Ideology doesn't really have a major role to play here. So 4 is again a misrepresentation. Let's eliminate that. 2 ends up being a correct answer. This should be an easier summary question because the paragraph has a nice structure to it. There are two ideas of the past and of the present being compared. So such paragraphs are easier for us to relate to. The first sentence introduces who we are talking about: cartographers, map makers. They design and create maps to communicate information about phenomena located somewhere on our planet. This is the role of a cartographer. In the past, cartographers did not worry too much about who was going to read their maps. Although some simple usability research was done, and what was the simple usability research? Like comparing whether circle or bar symbols worked best. All they knew was how to make maps. Let's make this our point X. In the past, cartographers created maps without worrying too much about who would read their maps and did just some simple usability research. This has changed now, however, due to all kinds of societal and technological developments. Now there are more demands. Map readers are more demanding because of the tools they use to read maps. Today, societal and technological developments, the more tools that they have, make map readers more demanding. And then our final point, cartographers who are also influenced by these trends are now more interested in seeing if their products are efficient, effective, and appreciated. So how has the cartographer of the modern times changed? Today, the cartographer is more interested in real usability research. They want to check, are their products, are their maps efficient, effective? Are they appreciated by the users? They're interested in all of that. In fact, they're more interested in all these things. Let's look at the options now. Option 1. Modern map makers evaluate a map's effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction of the user through a series of experiments. We are not told that this is done. A series of experiments are done to evaluate whether the maps are efficient, effective, and appreciated. That is certainly not mentioned, nor is it the key point here. Let's eliminate 1. Today, cartographers also need to look into the usability of maps because of the new technological developments. Today, we are not covering the past, but this point is correct. And when you emphasize on what today cartographers are doing, implicitly you are suggesting that in the past they didn't do that. So today's cartographers need to look into the usability of maps, not simple usability research, real usability, because there are so many technological developments and the map readers are more demanding. So option 2 looks like a good option. 3. Maps are being used for a variety of reasons and therefore map readers have become more demanding. This doesn't really cover the comparison between the past and the present cartographers. So clearly 3 is very limited and focuses on something less important. 4. New technological developments have prompted cartographers to experiment with their maps by applying these new innovations. They have not experimented. Now the problem here is that yes, the map readers have become more demanding. There have been new technological developments. However, that's not forced them to experiment. Cartographers are very interested in making maps or products efficient, effective, and appreciated. The author doesn't say that they've begun experimenting with their maps. So option 4 becomes incorrect. The best one here is 2 because it also implicitly refers to what cartographers did in the past. So 2 it has to be. The second odd sentence question is definitely an easy one. It has easy to read text, relatable topic. The theme can easily be figured out, something you should definitely have attempted. Sentence 1 tells us about urbanites also have more and better options for getting around. Uber is ubiquitous, something that is universal. Easy to rent dockless bicycles are spreading. Battery-powered scooters will be next. So urbanites have better transport options. When more people use buses or trains, the service usually improves because public transport agencies run more buses and trains. So if more people use buses or trains, the public transport agencies improve the service or availability of public transport because they run more buses and trains. Worsening services on public transport, terrorist attacks in some urban metros, and a rise in fares have been blamed for this trend. There is some trend we are talking about, but this trend is because of three things: worsening services on public transport, terrorist attacks in some urban metros, and a rise in fare. So problems of public transport blamed for this trend. It seems more likely that public transport is being squeezed structurally as people's need to travel is diminishing as a result of smartphones, video conferencing, online shopping, and so on. So, because people's need to travel is coming down, diminishing, reducing, it looks like public transport is being reduced or squeezed. People's diminishing need for travel affecting public transport. There has been a puzzling decline in the use of urban public transport in many countries. In the West, despite the growth in urban populations and rising employment, by the time you read the fourth sentence, you clearly figure that we are talking of the negative aspects of public transport, or the idea that public transport has come down. And that's what sentence 5 talks about. There's been a puzzling decline in the use of public transport. Though urban populations have grown, rising employment has happened, which means travel should have increased. But there's a decline. So, puzzling decline in the use of public transport despite growth in population. The theme clearly should be reasons for decline in the use of urban public transport. Even when you read sentences 3 and 4, you figure clearly that we are talking of the problems. And 5 clarifies that. So clearly, the puzzling decline and the reasons for the puzzling decline are being discussed. You find 4 giving you a reason, 3 giving you some reasons, 1 also providing you reasons, whereas 2 talks about how increased use of public transport improves the service or ends up creating more of public transport buses and trains, which is not the discussion of the other sentences. So clearly we can identify sentence 2 as our odd sentence here. A very easy question. This para completion is an easy to moderate one, not really difficult, can be managed if you read carefully. The given sentence says that the brain isn't organized the way you might set up your home office or bathroom medicine cabinet. What this means is that we organize our homes, the rooms in our homes or our bathroom medicine cabinets, etc. in a more systematic manner, but a brain is not organized this way. And when you read the next 2 sentences, you realize that they are explaining what the author means by the brain isn't organized. You can't put things anywhere you want, like we do in our home offices or bathroom medicine cabinet. The evolved architecture of the brain is haphazard and disjointed and incorporates multiple systems, each of which has a mind of its own. So how is the design or the architecture of the brain? It's haphazard, random, disjointed, not as organized as we keep things in our homes. There are multiple systems. So both these sentences you find are explaining what the author means by the brain isn't organized. And the contrast is with the way in which our homes are organized. So clearly I need to place this sentence in blank 1 because the next 2 sentences are explaining what we mean by the brain isn't organized. Do I need it in blank 2? Evolution doesn't design things and it doesn't build systems. It settles on systems that historically conveyed a survival benefit. This is telling you why is our brain not organized, the reason for it. Why is it so? Because evolution didn't design things like we design our homes and our medicine cabinets. It settles on systems that give us the best survival benefit. There is no comprehensive, overarching, grand planner engineering our brains like we engineer or design our homes. The brain is more like a big old house with piecemeal renovations done on every floor and less like new construction. So is there a gap in blank 3? Do we need something here? No. The two ideas are quite coherent. What we are saying here is that there is no one doing comprehensive or grand plans and engineering the systems of the brain. The brain, unlike our homes and our buildings, is more like an old house where we do piecemeal renovations part by part, which means I don't need this given sentence in blank 2, nor do I need it in blank 3 or in blank 4. I definitely don't need it because the sentence isn't concluding. The sentence is actually introducing the idea. That idea is explained in the next two sentences, and then after blank 2 onwards, there is an explanation of why is our brain not organized because of evolution, and how, unlike the planning that we do for our homes or constructions or buildings, the brain has piecemeal renovations that are done and not comprehensive buildings or structures. So clearly, you need this sentence at the start. It introduces the entire discussion. And that means that we need it in blank 1, and blank 1 is captured as option 2 here. Blank 1, option 2 is the correct answer. This passage presents an argument about an animal called bandicoot and is not a very difficult read. However, because there's so much information and the questions also focus on some of the details, the options can get a little close for a couple of questions, and your overall experience of this RC may not be a very smooth one. It's not a difficult one, but yes, it can't be called a very easy one because of these challenges, because of the excess of information. Now, what does the first paragraph tell us? It introduces this marsupial called bandicoot. Now, what is the marsupial? They're a type of mammals like the kangaroos, the koalas, whose young ones are not fully developed when they are born, and the mothers carry them in a pouch on their body till they are fully developed. Now, the British colonists, when they landed in Australia, they did not like this bandicoot. They weren't much impressed with the small-bodied, slender-snooted, snoot refers to the nose, the muzzle, which is much too long. The muzzle is the projected part of the face, the nose and the jaw, etc. Gives them an air exceedingly stupid, a naturalist noted in 1805. And they nicknamed one type, that is important for you to note, one type of bandicoots, the zebra rat, because of its black striped rump. Its rump or its backside, the behind part, is black striped, and therefore they call it the zebra rat. So what is the topic here? Clearly bandicoots. What about the bandicoots is being talked about here? That the British colonists in Australia were not much impressed by the small-bodied, slender-snooted marsupials called bandicoots and named one type the zebra rat. Let's look at what is said later. Para 2 describes this zebra rat. The smallest bandicoot is more commonly known today as the western barred bandicoot. So remember, we are talking about one type of bandicoot, which is the smallest one, also called the western barred bandicoot today. It exhibited a genius for survival in the harsh outback where its ancestors lived for some 26 million years. Now, what is the harsh outback? It is a reference to the uncultivated and uninhabited country lands of Australia. Its births were triggered by rainfall in the desert regions. It carried its very small-sized babies because they are not fully developed in a backward-facing pouch, so mothers could search for food and dig shallow camouflage shelters, not very deep, but shallow camouflage-covered shelters, hidden shelters. So the smallest bandicoot, the zebra rat, also called the western barred bandicoot, has survived the harsh outback for 26 million years. Para 3 continues the discussion. However, though it survived for 26 million years, these adaptations did not prepare this particular bandicoot for the colonial era transformation of its ecosystem. The British colonists may not have been very impressed with this bandicoot when they came to Australia, but they were not a good thing for this bandicoot, because with the colonists came transformation of the ecosystem. What is the transformation that the British colonizers brought with them? They brought imported British animals like cattle, rabbits. Now these cattle and rabbits, they were not original animals of Australia. They were brought from European lands. They damaged the delicate desert vegetation, and then there were these very greedy house cats that soon started attacking the bandicoots and eating them. Several of the dozen odd bandicoot species went extinct. Many species went extinct. By the 1940s, the western barred bandicoot, the one that we're talking about here, whose original range stretched across much of the continent, it actually was found across the Australian continent. Now, because of the colonial era transformation, it persisted on only 2 predator-free islands in Shark Bay of Australia's western coast. So, while some bandicoot species went extinct, this one particular bandicoot ended up surviving only on 2 islands on Shark Bay, which were predator-free, free from the cattle, the rabbits, the house cats, etc., which were British animals that were brought in by the Britishers. So the point being made here is that all the adaptations of the western bandicoot did not prepare it for the colonial era transformation of its ecosystem, particularly the damaged desert vegetation by cattle and rabbits and the attacking house cats, and survived only on 2 predator-free islands in Shark Bay. Paragraphs 5 and 6 talk about an effort to revive the western barred bandicoots, also called shark ray bandicoots because they are only survived on these islands. So wild deserts is, we figure, a sanctuary. Now that's a place that is using descendants of these few thousand island survivors in a new effort to seed a mainland bandicoot revival. They are trying to make sure that these bandicoots are seen across the continent. What they've done is import 20 bandicoots to a preserve, and that is a sanctuary, which is a quiet place with some unpredictable mercurial rainfall patterns. Now, the imported bandicoots are kept in 2 fenced exclosures. You can see that they are put in inverted commas because these spaces have been cleared of the invasive predatory rabbits and wildcats. Then there is a 3rd fenced area where there are 2 other rare marsupials that are kept. That's also the wild training zone. So that's more like a training space. These 2 rare marsupials are kept with a controlled number of cats, and they are constantly learning, training themselves on how to escape these rats, evading them. We don't know if the shark ray bandicoots, who don't really have an exposure to predators, that's why they are called predator naive, would be able to deal with something like this. We don't know that. However, efforts are being made to revive them. So in an effort to revive the shark ray bandicoots, Wild Deserts has imported 20 bandicoots into 2 fenced exclosures, free of rabbits and wildcats, with 2 other rare marsupials in a 3rd fenced area, sharing space with controlled number of cats, learning to evade them. What does the last paragraph tell us? In fact, last 2 paragraphs. For now, though, a recent surge of rainfall has led to a bandicoot joey boom, raising the Wild Deserts population to about 100. There are also signs of rebirth in the landscape itself. We know that it is rainfall that brings about the birth of these bandicoots. So there's a surge of rainfall, and that has led to a bandicoot joey boom. Joeys are a reference to baby bandicoots. So there's been a baby boom. A lot of baby bandicoots have been born. And there are also signs of rebirth in the landscape, the ecosystem itself, because they constantly dig. And with this constant digging, the bandicoots trap moisture, allow for seed germination, so the cattle-damaged desert can restore itself. And that is why they're called ecosystem engineers. So a recent surge of rainfall has led to a bandicoot baby boom, increasing the Wild Deserts population, reviving the landscape or the ecosystem with their constant digging. So the discussion here is about the western barred bandicoots, how it wasn't able to survive the colonial era transformation of its ecosystem, and that efforts are being made to revive this bandicoot and make sure that it is prevalent or found all across the Australian continent. So our main idea will have to be the western barred bandicoot had survived the harsh Australian outback for 26 million years, but all its adaptation did not prepare it for the colonial era transformation of its ecosystem, making it survive only on 2 predator-free islands in Shark Bay. Efforts to revive these bandicoots in a sanctuary, wild deserts, has brought about bandicoot baby boom and a revival of the landscape or the ecosystem. Which one of the following statements provides the gist of this passage, or the main idea, or the argument? Now, the problem with this question is that we may not have picked up the exact main idea of this passage. In our quick reading with a limited available time, we may have missed on the idea that we are talking of a specific bandicoot, that is the western barred bandicoot, that has been affected largely by the colonial era transformation of its ecosystem and only survives today on 2 of those predator-free islands in Shark Bay. Now, these are the points that we are looking for. One is the western barred bandicoot that was not able to deal with the colonial era transformation of its ecosystem, survives only on these 2 predator-free islands in Shark Bay, and that there are efforts being made to revive these bandicoots in a sanctuary today, which is also showing some results. Now let's look at the different options. The negligent attitude of the British colonists towards these bandicoots, evidenced by the names given to them, led to their annihilation. Now there are 2 issues here. One is annihilation. We are not saying that all bandicoots were annihilated or completely exterminated, eradicated, that they all went extinct. There are some types of bandicoots that went extinct, but the focus here is on the western barred bandicoot that managed to survive on these 2 predator-free islands. So annihilation is incorrect. These bandicoots generalizes to all bandicoots, and the focus of this one type of bandicoot is lost. There is also the problem with the negligent attitude of the British colonists, that this is what led to the annihilation. There is no explicit stating of the negligent attitude, but we do know that it's the British bringing the British cattle and animals that actually impacted and changed the ecosystem of Australia. So let's eliminate 1, clearly incorrect, multiple reasons for eliminating this. 2, the onslaught of animals such as rabbits, cattle and house cat brought in by the British led to the extinction of the western barred bandicoot. Once again, our problem is with the word extinction. While the other parts are correct, that the animals brought about a change in the vegetation and the ecosystem, but the western barred bandicoot was not made extinct. It managed to survive on 2 predator-free islands. So let's eliminate this. 3, marsupials are going extinct due to the colonial era transformation of the ecosystem, which also destroyed natural vegetation. Now, we are not generalizing this to marsupials. That would include kangaroos and several other animals. We are talking specifically of one type of marsupial called the bandicoot and a certain type of bandicoot. So once again, incorrect, completely generalized. Let's look at 4. A type of bandicoots was nearly wiped out. Nearly wiped out. That captures the nuance here. By invasive species, of course, the invasive species were brought in by the colonial rulers, but rescuers now pin hopes on a remnant island population. Of course, having details like the colonial era transformation or that the British colonists brought these animals that changed, etc., would have been wonderful. But all of that is captured by the words invasive species, and that rescuers trying to revive these bandicoots in wild deserts. So 4 captures the main idea aptly. This is a detail-based question, but can be confusing because it involves a lot of scanning, going back to the details and figuring out what are the characteristics of the western barred bandicoot. So the question asks you to identify the option which does not represent the characteristics of the western barred bandicoot. Now let's go back to paras 1 and 2. The characteristics are largely presented here. They are identified as small-bodied, slender-snouted. Snoot refers to nose. Marsupials, that type of mammals. Their muzzle, and the muzzle is the projected part of the jaw and the nose, which is much too long. And you have the British colonists nicknaming one type of bandicoots as the zebra rat because of its black striped rump or behind. The zebra rat is also the smallest bandicoot, and it carried its small-sized babies in a backward-facing pouch so that the mothers could search for food and dig shallow, camouflaged or hidden covered shelters. So our shadow answer largely here is that they are small-bodied. These are the characteristics that we are looking for. Slender, snouted marsupials, very long muzzle, black striped rump, smallest bandicoot, backward-facing pouch for babies, forages for food, dig shallow camouflage shelters. Now let's look at the options that we have. Long thin nose, yes. Slender snouted marsupial. Black striped back, yes, the rump refers to the back. Pouch for joeys. Joeys is a reference to baby bandicoots. So yes, backward facing pouch for babies. So 1 is not our answer. It represents the characteristics. 2. Smallest black striped marsupial. Now it only has a black striped rump that uses camouflage and dig. Now that's quite interesting because the use of the word dig in the paragraph is as a verb. To dig is to pull out or move soil. Dig here is used as a verb, uses X and Y, uses camouflage and dig. So dig is a noun here. And dig as a noun can mean several things. One of that is a shelter or a lodging. So it doesn't use camouflage and dig. It rather moves soil to create shallow, hidden shelters for itself. So that is clearly a distortion and a very interesting one. Smallest black striped marsupial, again the words black striped is incorrect because the marsupial entirely is not black striped. So this should be our answer here because that seems to be the exception. 3. Look of a rat, yes, it's called the zebra rat with a baby pouch and a slender snout, both of which are true. So 3 is not our answer. 4. Shallow diggers, yes, they dig shallow. Having an elongated muzzle, yes, their muzzle which is much too long. Which means 4 is also the characteristics of the western barred bandicoot. What is not is clearly captured in 2 because 2 distorts these characteristics. 2 is our answer. This question stem might be a little difficult to make sense of. You don't know what exactly the question is asking. Drawing the inference from where the inference can be drawn, figuring that out can also be a little challenging. Now the question asks us, why is the word exclosure used? What has wild deserts done in order for the word exclosure to be used? Exclosure means to keep out unwanted animals from an area. However, even if you don't know the meaning of that word, it still can be figured from the context. Para 6 tells us that the imported bandicoots occupy 2 fenced exclosures. And these fenced areas were cleared of invasive rabbits and wild cats or feral cats. There is a 3rd fenced area. Now in that area, there are these rare marsupials kept who are sharing the space with controlled number of cats who are predatory, learning to evade these cats. So we figure our shadow answer will have to be that these exclosures or 2 fenced exclosures were cleared of invasive rabbits and feral cats. They didn't have these unwanted predatory animals, invasive animals. Now let's look at the options. Ridding the main desert of feral cats and large bilbies. Now the context doesn't talk of the main desert. The context talks of 2 areas in this particular wild desert's place. So the main desert was not rid of feral cats and large wildebeest. We can eliminate this. Restoring cattle damaged deserts to green landscapes, we can see that this is not the context at all. This is not what is being done. So clearly eliminated. 3. Excluding animals to make the islands predator free. Are we talking of making the islands predator free, or are these two spaces, fence spaces, which are cleared of invasive rabbits and feral cats? So the entire island is not being made predator free. We can eliminate this. 4. Barring the entry of invasive species. If the word exclosure has been used here in the passage, it is in the sense of two spaces that are covered by fences where these invasive predatory species are not there. They've been cleared of that. So 4 should be our answer. According to the text, the western barred bandicoots now have a flattering name because they have a very easy inference this should be. Now, it takes us back to paras 7 and 8. This is where we're talking of what happened in wild deserts, what was done there. Because these bandicoots were kept, there are also signs of rebirth in the landscape. Of course, there's been a joey boom there, a lot of baby bandicoots born. But there are also signs of rebirth in the landscape. What have they been doing? The bandicoots are constantly digging, because of which they trap moisture, allow for seed germination, so the cattle damaged desert can restore itself. That's why they've been given this new nickname, which is a flattering one, because they are restoring or changing the landscape, letting the landscape be reborn, restoring the desert, and that is ecosystem. That's why they're being called ecosystem engineers. So our shadow answer clearly is that the western barred bandicoots have led to a rebirth of the cattle damaged desert, and the desert can be the landscape or the ecosystem with their activities of digging, etc. Let's look at the options. They've led to a revival in preserving the species. That's not why they have been given the name. Yes, there is a baby boom there. Many bandicoots have been born. However, the name is given because they have transformed the ecosystem. 2. Led to a surge and increase of rainfall. That is not related to a surge and increase of rainfall. Their constant digging only traps moisture, allows for seed germination. Let's eliminate this. Grown fivefold in terms of population. Once again, their growth in population is not the reason why they are called ecosystem engineers. So 4, aided in altering an arid environment, a dry, cattle damaged desert. Now that arid desert has been altered thanks to their activities. So 4 will have to be the answer, the reason why they are called ecosystem engineers. Now this para completion can be marked as moderate to difficult. It's challenging because there don't seem to be very, very obvious clues in the given sentence and the rest of the text. But yes, we can, if we make an effort, there are clues given here. The text is also quite difficult with some difficult words that are used. The given sentence says, comprehending a wide range of emotions, Renaissance music nevertheless portrayed all emotions in a balanced and moderate fashion. It portrayed all emotions in a balanced and moderate fashion, though it comprehended a wide range of emotions. The paragraph seems to talk about the rebirth or renaissance of music in England, particularly its history and characteristics. Now, the first sentence talks about a volume of translated Italian madrigals. Now, madrigals are supposed to be part songs. They were published in London during the year 1588. This sudden public interest facilitated an increase of English madrigal writing, as well as an increase or spurt of other secular music writing and publication. So what brought about an increase of English madrigal writing? That was a volume of translated Italian madrigals that published in London. So do I need the given sentence in blank one? You can see that it doesn't really relate. Why are we speaking about a wide range of emotions? Nevertheless, it portrayed all emotions in a balanced and moderate fashion. There is no clear link here. In fact, there is a clear coherence with the next sentence, which says this music boom. What was the music boom that is referred to in the previous sentence? The surge in English madrigal writing. So this boom lasted for 30 years, was as much a golden age of music as British literature was. So I don't need this in blank 1. Let's eliminate that. Do I need the given sentence in blank 2? Do I have something that necessitates that it portrayed emotions in a balanced and moderate fashion? All I'm told after blank 2 is that the rebirth in both literature and music, we're talking of the rebirth or the music boom, the surge of English madrigal writing and other secular music writing. So we still are discussing the rebirth or the surge in writing. So this rebirth in both literature and music, now there is an introduction of literature as well, originated in Italy and migrated to England. The English madrigal became more humorous and lighter in England as compared to Italy. Now we are introducing the slight changes that the English madrigal took on. It became humorous, lighter as compared to the Italian madrigals. Then comes in Renaissance music. So far we haven't mentioned Renaissance music. Probably it's only after we talk about rebirth of music that we are talking about Renaissance music. So this reborn music, that's what Renaissance is all about, rebirth, revival, reawakening. This reborn music, Renaissance music, was mostly polyphonic in texture, polyphonic, that which involves several voices or sounds. And then the sentence later says extreme use of and contrast in dynamics, rhythm, tone, color do not occur. Extreme uses and contrasts don't occur. So before we say that extremities are not touched on, what makes sense is that Renaissance music nevertheless portrayed all emotions in a balanced and moderate fashion. And we are talking of Renaissance music. We haven't mentioned this term before this sentence. So look at the linkages that are happening. We speak of Renaissance music was mostly polyphonic in texture. It included several voices. It comprehended several emotions, yet it was balanced and moderate. It didn't make use of extremes or contrasts. And then finally we are saying that the rhythms in Renaissance music tend to have a smooth, soft flow instead of a sharp, well-defined pulse of accents. Between 3 and 4, where does the contrast clearly surface? It nevertheless portrayed things in a balanced fashion. It didn't make use of extremes. That is 3, blank 3. The given sentence doesn't really fit in blank 4 because there doesn't seem to be any relevance of portrayed all emotions in a balanced and moderate fashion. It only fits in 3 because of what the next sentence says. So 3 it will have to be. Not an easy one, needs to be understood well. The language needs to be understood well. So blank 3 will have to be our answer, and that's given as option 4 here. So blank 3, option 4 is our correct answer. In terms of denseness of ideas and difficulty of concepts, technical words, this passage is the most difficult one. But for students who've done a lot of SimCats, because you came across a lot of economics passages in the SimCats, this should be fairly easy because you will be familiar with quite a bit of the concepts discussed here. The passage is a discussion or argument about the need for economics to borrow from other subjects, other disciplines. The first paragraph introduces the idea that economists seem less interested in learning from others than invading their garden plots. In other words, they are interested in discussing their disciplines and giving economic ideas or applying economic ideas to their disciplines. There is an example given of Gary Becker, an economist who had pioneered the idea of human capital, and he famously tackled topics like crime and domesticity, which is not economics basically, applying the methods of economics methods that were used in the study of markets to non-market life. He projected economics outward into new areas, new subjects, by revealing how humans calculate marginal utility, and marginal utility is the additional satisfaction a consumer gains from taking one more unit of a product when choosing their spouses or stealing from neighbors. So how humans calculate marginal utility in other areas than economics. At the same time, he did not let other ways of thinking enter his own economic realm. Did he borrow from anthropology or history, or let observations of other areas influence his economic ideas or homo economicus? Not really. He did not let other ways of thinking enter economics. Homo economics is this hypothetical person. It's a concept in economics of this hypothetical person who always makes economic decisions in a very rational manner, depending on his preferences. So Becker was a picture of the imperial economist, the dominating economist in the heyday, in the prime, the highest point of the discipline's success or its achievements, bravura, outstanding achievements. So the topic of discussion is economists' openness to ideas from other subjects, and the point being made is that economists are open to applying economic ideas to other realms, but are less open to accepting new ideas from other subjects to economics. Now look at how para 2 takes this ahead. But times have changed now. For the once almighty discipline, that's quite sarcastic. Economics has been taken to task. It's been questioned within and beyond its fortresses, its strongly constructed walls. Some economists have reached out, imported, borrowed, and collaborated, been less dominating or high-handed, more open. And there is an example given of Thomas Piketty, an economist, how he reached out to historians and borrowed from history. There is also mention of the field of behavioral economics, which is the fusion of economics and social psychology. Now, after having given birth to active subfields like judgment, decision-making, and a turn to experimentation, economics now aims to go beyond the cartoon, the caricature of rational man, the hypothetical homo economicus, to explain how humans make decisions. So, times have changed now, and economics is open to ideas from other subjects. It has borrowed from other subjects, giving rise to subfields like judgment, decision-making, experimentation, and aims to go beyond the concept of the rational man to explain economic decision-making. Para 3. It's important to underscore, to highlight how this flips the way we think about economics. Because we'd always thought of economics as driven by homo economicus. It was always believed that people have interests, preferences, which in the jargon of economics, argot is jargon, gets revealed in the course of people's choices. So your interest comes before actions, and your actions are determined by your interests or preferences. For example, there's an example given here. If you're hungry, you buy lunch. If you're cold, you get a sweater. Now, let's say you have less money with you and you can't afford to buy both. Then, which need you choose to meet, or what you choose to buy using your less money, will reveal your preference. That's your rational decision making. So, this flips the way we think of economic decision making as driven by interests or preferences and are rational. Para 4 highlights the role played by other subjects. Psychologists take one look at this simple formulation. What is this simple formulation? The simplified rational making concept that economics is based on. They shake their heads. They dismiss this. They cannot accept this. Increasingly, even some mainstream economists admit that homo economicus doesn't always behave in that so-called textbook rational manner. Irrational behavior does happen, but you can't simply wave away the irrational behavior as beyond economics, extra economic. You can't relate it with other subjects alone. Now, this is one place, the author says, where the humanist can help the economist. Humanism is an area which focuses more on the person, people, rather than supernatural stuff, etc. So, understanding the person, the human, can help the economist. So our argument here ends up being psychologists disagree with this simple formulation of rational decision making. And even some economists agree that irrational behavior can't be dismissed. The humanist can help economics here. In fact, how can the humanist help economics here? Narrative economics. If you are going to involve storytelling in economics, talking about individuals and how they have made their decisions, then it can help us understand a lot of things. Para 5 focuses on other subjects. Above all, we need politics and institutions, not just psychology and humanism, but we also need politics and institutions. The author says that Schiller gave us a concept in economics where he rejects the role of politics and institutions. Now, what is this concept that Schiller gave us? He connected perceptions of narratives to changes in behavior. How we perceive stories change our behavior. And that change in behavior brings about change in society or social outcomes. That's a circle that he gives us. This cycle was once mediated or dominated by institutions. Once upon a time, institutions had a major role to play in connecting the changes in behavior to social outcomes. Who were these institutions? Political parties, lobby groups, media organizations. What did they do? They played an important role in giving some official status, making legal, legitimating, representing, and excluding interests. In other words, these institutions had a major role to play in the way in which social changes happened. Yet institutions have been stripped from Schiller's account to reveal a bare dynamic of emotions and economics. So, it's just the human beings who makes decisions, and that is how rational decision making happens, without the intermediating place of politics. So, the author is trying to say that Schiller is wrong in not including these intermediating institutions, and they have a major role to play in economic decision making. So economics also needs politics and institutions. Unlike Schiller's account of perception of narratives bringing changes in behavior and therefore social outcomes, which leaves out the intermediating institutions, which are the political parties, lobby groups, and media. And they are important because they are the ones that legitimate, represent, and exclude interests. Let's look at how to put all of this together and identify our main idea. So what we are able to figure from the first couple of paragraphs is that economics originally kept itself closed. It was not open to new ideas from different subjects. It contributed to other subjects, but it didn't borrow. But slowly times changed and economics has begun borrowing from other subjects. Now it aims to go beyond the concept of rational man or homo economicus. And that flips the way in which we think of economics. The author then goes on to say that psychology and other fields like humanism, politics, institutions, all of these have a role to play in economics. So with changing times, economists have opened to borrowing from other fields, aiming to go beyond the concept of the rational man to explain decision-making in economics. Psychology, humanism, politics, and institutions can help economics. This question should be a fairly easy inference because there is a mention of the first paragraph, and the first paragraph is quite easy for us to understand. We do understand what's the important point being made here. Now let's look at this. The first sentence itself starts with a key point here. Oftentimes, when economists cross borders, they are less interested in learning from others than in invading their garden plots. They try to push their ideas onto others, but they are not interested in taking ideas from the others. And then we have a mention of Gary Becker. For instance, he pioneered the idea of human capital, but how did he do so? He applied methods honed in the study of markets to non-market life. He projected economics outward into new realms. But at the same time, the last line, at the same time, he did not let other ways of thinking enter his own economic realm. So our shadow answer here can be that economists like Becker applied economic ideas, non-economic fields, but did not allow ideas from other fields to enter economics. Option 1. Had begun to borrow concepts from other disciplines, but were averse to the latter applying economic principles. clearly the reverse of what is the point made. The point made is that they had projected economics outward into other realms, but they did not like to borrow concepts from other disciplines. They were not averse to the latter, to other disciplines applying economic principles. In fact, they pushed economic ideas onto other disciplines. So clearly one is contradictory to the point being made here. 2. Benefited from the application of their principles and concepts to non-economic phenomena. This is not the point that the author is making in this paragraph. There might be a reference made to some benefit that they get by applying economic principles to non-economic phenomena. For instance, Gary Becker pioneered the idea of human capital, and to do so, he tackled topics like crime and domesticity by applying the methods of study of markets to non-market life. But this is not the point being made. The larger point is that while economists projected their ideas onto non-market areas, they didn't borrow any ideas from the other disciplines. So 2 cannot be the key point here. 3. Used economics to analyze non-market behavior without incorporating perspectives from other areas of inquiry. Now this is exactly what our shadow answer is, that they projected economics outward into new realms, but they did not accept other ways of thinking enter the economic realm. 3 very well captures this idea. Let's look at 4. Tended to guard their discipline from poaching by academics from other subject areas. Now we know what is poaching: illegal hunting and killing of animals. To guard their discipline from poaching, it's the other way around. In fact, they were trying to push economic ideas or methods polished in the study of markets to other areas. They did not defend their discipline from other disciplines trying to take ideas or so. So clearly 4 is incorrect. It's in fact the reverse of what is said. So we come back to 3. 3 is clearly the point being made in the first paragraph. The author critiques Schiller's approach to behavioral economics for. Now we know this occurs in the 5th paragraph. This might be a slightly difficult part of the passage, but what is Schiller talking about here? Schiller presents a certain cycle of how economic decisions happen. He says that we have perceptions of stories. There are stories and we perceive the stories in some way, and that changes our behavior. And that change in behavior is what influences society or social outcomes. So that cycle is perception to behavior to society. The author says that this cycle was once mediated or dominated by institutions. That is, what is it that played a very critical role in linking all of this and getting this to happen? That was the institutions. And who are these institutions? Political parties, lobby groups, media organizations. They played a vital role. But what is missing in Schiller's account is that the institutions, the intermediary institutions have been dropped. They've been stripped from Schiller's account. The cycle only has perception to behavior to society. So it's a bare dynamic of emotions and economics without the intermediating place of institutions or politics. So our shadow answer here will have to be that Schiller does not consider the mediating, dominating. It's a vital role. They were dominated, mediated, and they played a vital role. Those institutions that played a vital role is not considered by Schiller in the cycle of perception to behavior to society. That is what the author criticizes, clearly seen in the last sentence. Now let's look at the options. Denigrating the role of institutions while creating a link between behavioral economics and perceptions. Now, does the author criticize Schiller's approach for denigrating the role of institutions? All we know is that institutions have been stripped from Schiller's account, meaning that he does not consider the role played by the institutions. Does Schiller downgrade or disparage, belittle the institutions? No such thing. So the author doesn't criticize Schiller's approach for denigrating or downgrading, disparaging the role of institutions. He just leaves them out, that's all. So 1 is extreme. The use of the word denigrate is extreme. 2, relying excessively on storytelling as the main influence on the formation of perceptions. We know this is not the key criticism. Schiller considers storytelling as one of the elements of that cycle. Storytelling is what creates our perceptions. The author's criticism of Schiller's approach to behavioral economics is that the cycle does not involve the important institutions, the intermediary institutions. So this is not his criticism. We can easily eliminate this. 3. Ignoring the marginal role that media and politics play in influencing people's behavior. Does it play a marginal role? The author says that these institutions play a vital role. These institutions mediate or dominate this entire cycle. So the author doesn't criticize Schiller for ignoring the marginal role. He ignores the vital role that these institutions have to play. So 3 is incorrect again. 4. Linking emotions and rational behavior without considering the mediation of social institutions. This is what the author critiques Schiller for. The author says that institutions have been stripped from Schiller's account. He has not included the institutions and the intermediating role that they play. So he only links emotions with economics or rational behavior without considering the mediation, and that's a key word for us, mediation of social institutions. So 4 is our correct answer. Times have changed for the once almighty discipline. We can infer from this statement and the associated paragraph that the author is being. This is a tone question, something that's appeared after a very long number of years. Now let's understand what the author's attitude here is. Now in the first paragraph, we know that he focuses on how economics is very willing to project its ideas onto other disciplines, but does not allow other ways of thinking enter the economic realm. In fact, look at the tone of the last sentence. Becker was a picture of the imperial, high-handed, dominating economist. In the heyday or prime of the discipline's bravura, technical skills, achievement, outstanding achievements. In the prime of the discipline's achievements, he was a picture of the domineering economist. But times have changed for the once almighty discipline. Today, economics has been taken to task, brought to its knees, within and beyond its walls, and economists have reached out, imported, borrowed, collaborated. They are less imperial, less dominating now, more open. And they even aim to go beyond the caricature of rational man. So, our shadow answer can be that the author is trying to mock, ridicule, make fun of indirectly, that the once almighty imperial economics that refused to take ideas from other disciplines has now been taken to task, is now accepting of ideas from other disciplines. Let's look at the options. Sarcastic, about how economists who earlier shunned other disciplines are now beginning to incorporate them in their analysis. Is he showing sarcasm here? Yes, he's mocking, ridiculing that the once strong discipline, the once confident or overconfident discipline is today brought down to its knees. Today it's more open to ideas from other disciplines. So one can be a very good one. We definitely see sarcasm here. The author is making fun of indirectly. Let's keep one. 2. Judgmental about the ability of economic tools to accurately manage crisis, leading to the downfall of this lofty science. There has been no downfall of the lofty science. It's just that economics has changed its approach. It's more open today to accepting new ideas. So is the author judgmental about the ability of economic tools to manage crisis? He's not questioning the competence of economic tools and concepts here. He's rather talking about how economics regarded itself as complete in itself, as super confident, not willing to take ideas from elsewhere, and that has changed today. So there is no judgment about the ability of economic tools to manage crisis. Let's eliminate 2. 3. Disparaging. To disparage is to belittle, to look down upon. Of economists' inability to precisely predict market behavior, and are now borrowing from other disciplines to remedy this. Now this is quite close. But is the author really disparaging, looking down upon economists and how they are not able to predict market behavior? As discussed for option 2, the author isn't questioning the concepts of economics or the ability of economists to deal with markets. He is rather critical of the attitude that the economists showed of being self-contained and not willing to take anything from other disciplines. So 3 cannot really capture the point being made. Let's eliminate 3. 4. Critical of economists openly borrowing and collaborating across disciplines to explain how humans make decisions. It's in fact quite the opposite of this. The author is critical of economics and economists in the first paragraph for not willing to accept ideas from other disciplines. He doesn't criticize the stance that they have today, where they are less imperial, more open and accepting of new ideas. So 4 clearly cannot be the point. 3 was our close option, but we quite understand that the author is not disparaging the ability or inability of economists. So 1 it has to be. His point is that they were all closed, they shunned other disciplines, but today they've been brought down to their knees and they're open to other subjects. We can infer from the passage that the term Homo economicus refers to someone who, for somebody comfortable with economic concepts and terms, you will easily be able to answer this without even referring to the passage. But for those who aren't very familiar with economic jargon, you may have to go back to the passage and try to figure where you can get this answer from. Now let's look at that. In para 2, we are told that the field aims to go beyond the caricature of rational man to explain how humans make decisions. So economics uses this idea of rational man, and that's capitalized, to explain how economic decisions are made by humans. And the field is trying to go beyond that concept. And then in para 3, we have an explanation of this. What is this rational man that makes economic decisions? For generations, economists have presumed that people have interests, preferences that get revealed in the course of people's choices. So there is a choice that a person makes based on the interests and preferences. Which need you choose to meet using your scarce savings reveals your preference. That's the example given in para 3. And in para 4, we are told how, while psychologists refuse to accept this idea, even some mainstream economists admit that Homo economicus doesn't behave like the textbook or standard maximizer, trying to maximize benefits. Because irrational decisions can happen, and you can't say that irrational decisions are not part of economics. In other words, what we infer about Homo economicus is that it is the standard maximizer, or it is a concept, the hypothetical man, who behaves in ways that are rational based on its interests or preferences. He makes economic decisions in rational ways based on his interests and preferences. So a reading of all of this allows us to infer that the so-called picture of the rational man or the concept of Homo economicus is this. Now let's look at the options. Believes in borrowing and collaborating with other disciplines in their work. No, we can easily eliminate this because he's not someone who wants to borrow from other disciplines. Maximizes their opportunities based on non-market choices. Now, the choices that the rational man or Homo economicus does is not based on non-market choices. It is based on market choices. So 2 can be eliminated. Option 3 is not influenced by the preferences and choices of others. We are not told here about the preferences and choices of others. His rational decision making depends on his interests or preferences. That gets revealed in the course of the choices that he makes. And there is an example also given about buying food or buying a sweater. So 3 can be eliminated. 4 makes rational decisions based on their own preferences. That's what we figure from para 3 and then para 4 as well. So Homo economicus is someone who makes decisions in rational ways based on its interests or preferences. 4 is our answer.